The decade of the greats is here. It's the 2000s, the Y2Ks, the third millennium. From the words of Sony themselves, the best-selling console of all time, PlayStation 2 launched in 2000 and changed the game forever. Sony's PS2 introduced some features that still define the PlayStation experience we still enjoy to this day. The PS2 was a gaming powerhouse. It was the origin of widespread online gaming, high-definition graphics, and included two of its major selling points during launch: backwards compatibility and a DVD player. It didn't get its title as the best-selling console without selling over 155 million freaking units. Are you kidding me?
Say what?
More than 3,800 game titles were released for the PS2 and more than 1.5 billion copies have been sold. Again,
Say what?
the best-selling game of the PS2 was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Remember CJ? This game sold 17 million units. The PS2 introduced many of our beloved game series as exclusives, including God of War, Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, Devil May Cry, and lastly, my own personal favorite, Kingdom Hearts. Nintendo sought to improve upon its latest Game Boy Color with what was described at the time as a portable Super Nintendo Entertainment System, but with even advanced hardware.
I see what you did there.
The Game Boy Advance was a technically superior and much more popular than its predecessor, the Game Boy Color, while maintaining backwards compatibility with it and the original Game Boy. It had a better battery life and color palette, proved that sprite-based games still had a place versus the 3D powerhouses that were on the market. It had us hooked for hours of gameplay of Super Mario Advance, Metroid Fusion, Castlevania, and its best-selling games Pokemon, Ruby, and Sapphire that sold together 60 million copies. Now to Microsoft's first attempt in the console market, the Xbox. No one knew at the time if it was going to play actual console games or only PC ports, but after when it was eventually released in 2001, it improved upon online play introduced by the Sega Dreamcast. It included a built-in HDD, which eliminated the need for memory cards and included an Ethernet port. Did you know that it had regular PC components, an Intel Pentium 3 CPU, 64 megabytes in RAM, and Nvidia provided the GPU? It brought some memorable exclusives, Fable and Ninja Gaiden, and if you've ever heard of Halo or Halo 2, you'll know why the term online multiplayer is synonymous with the Xbox, partly because of the Xbox Live service that allowed subscribers to download new content and connect to other players. It wouldn't be the console market without Nintendo, would it? Nintendo's response to Sony and Microsoft was the GameCube. Nintendo was trailing behind since its Nintendo 64 console failed in the 90s. Check out our 90s video to learn more in the top right hand. So the GameCube came to recapture the lost market share, but sadly it didn't work. GameCube fell behind the PS2 and the Xbox. It was the first console from Nintendo to use optical discs but didn't use conventional DVDs or CDs, but instead opted for mini DVD. Focused on really family-friendly games and tried their hand in online gaming but didn't do so well. It could connect to the Game Boy Advance via the link cable, which allowed players access to exclusive in-game features using the GBA as a second screen and a controller. Now, 2003, Nintendo released something of a godsend. The Game Boy Advance SP was more than half the size of the original GBA and had a foldable screen that looks like the old Game & Watch series that Nintendo released in the 1980s. If you want to know more about that, click on the link on the top right hand corner of the video. Well, 2004 brought us the glorious Nintendo DS, short for dual screen. It introduced new features to handheld gaming, a second screen that was touch enabled, a built-in microphone, and support for wireless connectivity. It had a clamshell design similar to the Game Boy Advance SP and was supposed to be a third pillar in the market to complement the Game Boy Advance and GameCube. But because of its backwards compatibility and its strong sales, it eventually became a successor to the whole Game Boy series. It brought us the beloved New Super Mario Bros., which is also its best-selling game, selling 30.8 million copies. Just after the release of the Nintendo DS, Sony released its own handheld gaming console and one of our all-time favorites, the PlayStation Portable, or the PSP. It came with a 4.3-inch widescreen, an analog stick for 3D gameplay, internet browser, media bar, MP3 player, and connectivity to other Sony products. It was the first handheld console to play optical discs, which played not only games but also movies. It formed the first real competitor to Nintendo's handheld domination, but the Nintendo DS did have the edge in number of units sold total, selling 154.02 million units versus approximately 82 million units sold for the PSP. 2005 marks the last release in the Game Boy family, the Game Boy Micro. It looked like an NES controller from back in the day, was smaller, more compact. Unfortunately, due to internal design changes, lost its backwards compatibility with the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Achievement unlocked. This was the term first coined by the Xbox 360, the forerunner of next generation of hardware. It included a much improved Xbox Live service and had support for HD gaming. It came in different retail options, Elite, Premium, and Arcade, but was plagued with the most famous problem in console history, the Red Ring of Death, or RROD. However, that did not reduce the Xbox 360 popularity among gamers, and with the introduction of the Kinect motion sensing camera, sales skyrocketed.
Dollar bills, y'all.
The Xbox 360 had a very successful roster of games, including Halo 3, Gears of War, Mass Effect, Ninja Gaiden 2, the sequel to the much successful Ninja Gaiden from the original Xbox, Project Gotham Racing 4, and its most successful game, The Kinect Adventures, that sold 18 million copies. In 2006, Nintendo released the Nintendo DS Lite, the highest-selling handheld of all time, selling 154.02 million units at the time of its discontinuation. It was a slimmer, lighter, brighter screen version of the original Nintendo DS, but Nintendo didn't stop there. They went on to release what would be later known as the 5th best-selling video game console of all time, the Nintendo Wii, which introduced the Wii Remote. You know that remote control you swing around to play games? No, not that one. Oh yes, that's the one. A revolution in the way we interact with video games. It was backwards compatible with the Nintendo GameCube, using the 4 controller ports and memory cards on top. The Wii Shop enabled users to download older games from popular systems of old: the Genesis, the NES, the Super NES, Nintendo 64, and TurboGrafx. We can't ignore its top games: Super Mario Galaxy, Metroid Prime 3, and Super Smash Bros. Brawl. And now for the main contender in the 7th generation console war, the PlayStation 3. Announced at E3 2005 and released in November of 2006, it was the first console to use Blu-ray discs and introduced us to the PlayStation Net. Did you know that during the first 24 hours of the PS3's release were so action-filled, a customer was shot, campers were robbed at gunpoint, some were even shot in a drive-by shooting with BB guns, and 60 campers fought over 10 systems. The Last of Us, God of War 3, Uncharted series, Resistance, Killzone, Gran Turismo, Little Big Planet, Infamous. That's just a taste of what the PlayStation 3 brought to the table. Revised models came in a couple of years to come of the top-selling handheld game consoles on the market. The PSP came in 2 flavors, PSP 2000 and PSP 3000. Both of them focused on being slimmer and lighter than their predecessor. The Nintendo DS dropped a new version called the DSi in 2009, which added 2 cameras, supported internal and external storage, connected to an online store called the DSiWare, but lost backwards compatibility with the GBA. DSi-specific games that utilized the cameras and the internal storage were released after the release of the DSi. A larger version of the same handheld was also released in 2009 called the DSi XL, with larger screens measuring at 4.2 inches versus 3 inches of the DS Lite model. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching.